Hello everyone and welcome back to another Fate video. While waifu and husbando.png files are certainly the main luring attraction of a gacha game, if it wishes to survive and thrive, it also needs good gameplay and an interesting story. I would argue that the story outweighs the gameplay here, but then again, I enjoy visual novels as well, and that isn't everybody's cup of tea. FGO has a fairly compelling story about bringing heroes from across time to help save humanity that has been reduced to ash or white dust, and seeing how these different characters intermingle with each other and how their own personal histories influence their reactions. Plus, it is a great way to introduce people to stories from cultures outside of their own. However, not all stories are made equally, and FGO certainly has some stinkers thrown in. So today we're doing something a little bit different. After making the recap videos, it was suggested to me to make a video ranking the singularities in FGO. As I play exclusively on NA at this time, this list will only be going up to the most recent Lost Belt in NA, Lost Belt 5. But without further ado, let's get started. So here is our list. I've broken it up into 5 categories. I hated it, I did not enjoy it, I did enjoy it, greatly enjoyed it, and I loved it. Of course, this is all my own opinion, so your list very likely differs from mine. However, this is the one that is factually correct. I guess I should begin with an apology and an explanation. Each singularity has something good in it. They are all aiming to tell a story and introduce characters that they hope people will enjoy, and to keep the audience from yawning and putting their phones away. In that vein, these are the stories that I did not want to sit through at all. The ones I slowly scraped through because I knew that better tales lay beyond the horizon. And it's true. As the story of FGO goes, the storytelling almost exclusively gets better. Let's start with what I would argue is the worst singularity, London. This one was the very worst thing a story can be. Boring. A bad story can have value assigned to it by virtue of how bad it is, because it's so absurd. A boring story doesn't offer anything. London is the exposition chapter. It tells us who the villain really is, and gives us our enemy to fight, and that's pretty much it. As was pointed out in my recap video, there is an entire part of London that exists to introduce Tesla and make him one of the most boring characters ever. We also see this chapter as a way to shove in 2 more characters, Tamamo and Kintoki, who show up, do nothing, and then leave. There are 2 reasons I hate this chapter. 1. Mordred is the best character in Fate Apocrypha, and her depiction in this chapter undoes any and all of that good character writing and turns her back into a meathead with daddy issues. Mordred's depiction in Fate is actually super interesting because it allows for character growth and discovery, and they just eliminate it to start from scratch. Before anyone says that the anime hadn't come out yet, I am aware, but the novels had been in print since 2014. FGO came out in 2015. So, the writers of this character knew who she was and still decided to throw her out. Second, this chapter was following after Okianus. Okianus is the best early game chapter, chock full of adventure and discovery, so then being dropped in foggy old London with a long guy, a clown, and a robot really is a severe change of pace. The combination of all of this just makes me despise this chapter. Second is Orleans. This one is bad because of the writing as well, but also because the gameplay is completely lacking. Mind you, I do not have nearly as much to say about this one as it is the very first singularity we go to that is not fuyuki. So I almost give it a pass, but compared to today's standard in FGO, it is incredibly weak. You fight the same default enemy dragon and soldier, and some servants from the standard story gacha. The story itself carries no real weight as it's just a standard go-to story. Oh no, the servants have madness enhancement! Oh no, a big dragon! Oh no, Kiyohime! It is mostly skippable and doesn't offer much as a story. Even Jeanne is boring. This is before they wanted to make her an airhead One-san type, which fits her better. So she's just kind of standard bumbling knight who doesn't think that she's a combatant, when in reality she's a 5-star in the gacha. Come on now. My final chapter in the hate category is Agatha. This one suffers from the same issue as the previous in that it's boring, but what's worse is that there is not an ounce of subtlety in the writing. Well, I will admit that characters such as Megalos are interesting design-wise, and Pentha's a decent character in the chapter. The interesting moments are bogged down by the constant exposition and being able to predict what happens next. The moment the weird old man appears, Da Vinci is like, I don't like him, he gives me a bad vibe, so we know he's the actual villain. All of the characters in this chapter are one beat, including our companions, which is a damn shame because Deon is a fascinating character, but they just made him hee-ho French ladyboy. Wu Zetian is the only female emperor from Chinese history, and she's written as a torture goblin. Wu's interlude does wonders to build her character, but for her first introduction, she is not interesting in the slightest. The final is Sherazade. This one is the worst because she is not at all suited for a villain's role, and it feels almost like a cop-out that she's the final baddie. She is just like, I don't want to die, so I'll kill everybody and erase myself from the throne of heroes. Garbage writing. Also, Helena is just there. Her entire role in the story is one of convenience, written solely to get us out of the situation that the author thought was genius. Also, the gameplay is pretty bad in this one, with the cool fights being so spread apart from each other that you're just begging not to fight the same golems or default pirate enemies again. I would rank this one below Orleans, if not for it having challenging content and some of the more beautiful battlefield environments in all of FGO. Alright, next up are the ones that I did not enjoy, but I did not hate. This list leads off with Septum. Septum suffers from much of the same issues as Orleans, being one of FGO's very first chapters. I remember enjoying this one more than Orleans, probably because I enjoyed the interactions that we had with Nero more than just the plain Jane Jean. Nero is at least a semi-interesting character in this story, in that she isn't actually a servant yet. That plot point alone, coupled with the fact that we have to make sure actual servants don't kill her, makes it mildly interesting. Mind you, there is no development in the characters at all, and a lot of running around and fighting reskinned enemies over and over and over and over and over again, so there is no challenge present here. Next up is Fuyuki, which is only this high because it sets up the plot of the story incredibly well. The gameplay of Fuyuki is terrible, but it is a tutorial, so that's kind of understandable. Thankfully, they alleviate this by going hard on the storytelling. They give us a clear purpose, an enemy, a reason to seek revenge, and acknowledgement of what is to come. It works perfectly as a starting area, but I knock it points for just being Fate Stay Night bad ending in terms of enemies and gameplay. Mind you, this is a smart move marketing-wise, because it gives player an area that if they know Fate, they're likely familiar with, but still, Fuyuki serves its purpose and nothing else. Alright, I feel like I've covered all the grounds on the ones that most people agree on, so now we're gonna get some more controversial picks. Lostbelt 2 sucks in a story sense. I thoroughly enjoyed playing with it initially, but looking back, I struggle to remember anything of actual interest that occurs. Lostbelt 2 is much like the environment that it is in. Desolate and cold. The sense of urgency that they place upon us this time around is that Holmes got punched in half by Sigurd or something. So, we're stuck until we can find a way to get him fixed up. The concept with the villagers is kind of interesting, but it's been done before. Stay inside the walls or suffer a painful death. The Valkyrie are literally robots and are boring. Sigurd is boring. Skadi is somewhat interesting given her plight of being the last of the gods and willing to come down to face us for all the marbles. But What's-Her-Face's motive as a cryptor is bad. Oh, I had a hard childhood, so now I will escape into a world of my own and then die by the hands of a guy I like. And in exchange, I'm gonna wipe out everybody else. I will say, I enjoyed the fight against Suitor, and how he played in the story. His entrance was fairly well done and was entertaining, but other than that, it's just kind of bland. Notice how I have not mentioned Napoleon. That's because he doesn't do anything. He bailed us out and hung out for a while, then went off and died. It's just meh. I will say, the ending bit where they actually show what happens when the world is pruned away does still stick with me, so that is something that I can say they've done very well. But in that same vein, all the cool things that happen at the end. That's bad writing. Alright, that's enough being cynical. Let's go to the chapters that I did actually enjoy. America was entertaining, if nothing else. I hate Maeve as a villain, because she's predictable and a one-trick pony, but Ku Alter makes for a good villain because his motive is clear and he works towards it. He just wants to fight and keep fighting until someone can kill him. And honestly, it is somewhat lazy writing in hindsight, but I'm going to give it the pass for this. This isn't exactly a highly rated chapter. While also a one-trick, he isn't annoying about it. He also has some sass, which is kind of nice. Nightingale makes her a great character, being absolutely nuts and literally telling Ku to kill himself, also carrying Rama on her back for the whole chapter. The subplot with Edison and HPB is boring though, and offers nothing to the story. Nero, Bride, and Liz are pretty cute together, but then we kill Nero off. She also seems to remember us from Septum, which contradicts what we know about the summoning process, but so does a bunch of other stuff, so it's fine. It's perfectly fine as a story. Solomon is fondly remembered for the shit show that it was. The story was fine. A classic bringing all the friends and enemies we met along the way to fight for a righteous cause was fairly well executed, and farming the demon god pillars was great. The revelation that Romani was Solomon was executed well, and the boss fights were fairly challenging. The introductions of image cinematics with MASH were great, and it's created a real sense of urgency assuming you played at the time. Never forget that canonically the Korean server didn't succeed and was incinerated as a result, making their existence a lost belt. Shout out to the commenter who pointed that out, it really makes me chuckle. I'm not going to put this higher because it is lacking in a lot of ways. Namely the length. There is a lot of just, oh, hey, look, it's the people who we know, which is cool, but it goes on for way too long. It's just perfect for what it is as a conclusion and makes for a nice wrap up to the first part of the story. So I think it's just fine. Next up is Salem. Once again, this is a chapter with a lot of cool ideas, amazing theming, but has so much nothing in between that you get bored. So, I enjoyed this chapter for a handful of reasons. 1, I'm a huge Lovecraft simp. 2, I'm a history simp. 3, this chapter actually tackles some of the real issues that would occur when summoning a few hundred servants from across time and cultures and putting them in a room with one another. Let's start from the top. Lovecraft is hands down one of the most influential horror artists to have ever lived, if not the most. He single-handedly revolutionized the sci-fi and cosmic horror genres, and I love it. This chapter is full of references to his works, such as the Dreamland of Unknown Cadath and the Dunwich Horror. So, seeing characters from both of these stories appear in 17th century Salem is a treat. That leads me into my next point. The Salem Witch Trials is an amazing story in history, possibly being the most well-known case of mass hysteria. The mixture of puritanical religious views and devious nature of children blended together to lead to the executions of several innocent people. 3. The conflict between Robin and Sanson is one that I wished would be addressed more. Think about it. We are always given the most mundane excuse of, well, we have a common cause, so let's not worry about it. Anytime it's brought up that these two people should hate each other. Robin Hood was a vigilante fighting for the good of Sherwood and Nottingham. In his eyes, Sanson is just another tool that the royalty used to enforce their rule. So of course these two would butt heads with one another. Sure, we do see it from time to time with Edison and Tesla, Boudica and Nero, or even Jean Kay and Mothman. But these are usually played for comedic purposes, save for Boudica, who is actually fairly well written with her interactions. To cover the main story of Salem, it's just serviceable. It builds good tension, the manifesting of servants is interesting and unique for a singularity, but there is so much exposition in this chapter that it drives you mad. A story that regurgitates the exact same points at you over and over is painful to read. Thankfully, this one is more of a slow burn that gets better as it goes on, as opposed to, say, Agatha or Lostbelts 2, which is just a continual slow pacing. It's good. I enjoyed this one. Next is the very first Lostbelt. This one was also a slow burn, but it does one very important thing incredibly well. It introduces what a Lostbelt really is in the best way possible. A Lostbelt is a possible course that human history could have taken, a what-if scenario. For this, the what-if scenario is, what if an asteroid struck the Earth and sent us into another ice age? While most of humanity went extinct, Ivan the Terrible and his mages fused their surviving populace with animals in order to bear the extreme weather change. This allowed for them to survive into the year 2020 or 2018, but in exchange essentially gave up their humanity. It is here that humanity would eventually stall out and quit progressing, thus it was pruned away. Perfect. Absolutely perfect and easily understandable explanation of what the concept is and why it happens. The reason that this is so low on my list is that is the only part of this that is exceptional. Everything else that it does is just fine. The fights are challenging, which is nice, and the reveal of Ivan, I'm sure, was more impactful for those who played on JP and had never seen him before. Ivan's design is awesome. Even among people who have never seen him before in Fate, he is easily identifiable by his imposing aura and familiar crown. I will say, the subplot with Atalanta Alter is lackluster and requires the players to have seen Fate Apocrypha to understand her obsession. Same thing goes for Ivasbraun. Billy was really good in this chapter. He has a really good scene in there. Beowulf was just kind of there. Salieri was pretty interesting for a while, but The story itself was fine. Anastasia was boring as a villain, however, which is a shame because they can do a lot with her character and they just didn't. It is fine for what it is, and I enjoyed it as a good establishing chapter. Alright, let's get to the greatly enjoyed. Lostbelt 3, That Time China Solved the Carbon Footprint. This chapter excels at two things: character development and urgency. Seeing certain servants grow, or instead follow their ideals but in a new form to grow, is a really fascinating thing. The servants that we summon for this chapter are Mordred, Jinkei, and Spartacus. Spartacus is the most memorable of these in the chapter because of his actions. It is played around with in his bond descriptions that he will betray the orders of his master if he feels that they are actually an oppressor. regardless of how deep their bond actually is. We see him directly break our orders in the chapter in order to follow what his heart believes is correct, and it turns out that it was, as he saves an entire village through the sheer force of muscle in one of the most memorable cutscenes fate has given us. Jean K grows in the sense that she gets the opportunity to kill the one that she has always dreamed of slaying, Mothman. However, through the actions of the Lostbelt, she now has a reason to kill him rather than the flippant, I was born to kill this man, all I do is kill thing, that she has had going on for a while. She is killing him because he has strayed from the path of humanity, and no longer represents the ideals of the China that she knew. Mordred doesn't really grow in this chapter, but her being in it actually attempting to act as a knight rather than the me have daddy issues thing is a very nice change of pace. This is an example of how you write Mordred well. As for the urgency aspect, they do it well in two ways. One very weak one, and one really strong one. The weak one is the poison subplot. Realistically, they're not going to kill off either us or Gordolf just yet. So while I did feel no urgency for this, it definitely works as a good plot device to get us into the Chinese Lostbelt. Second, we are not threatened by the Cryptor at all. We are threatened by the Lostbelt King Mothman. We find that Consort Yu is weak and Lanling is lackluster, compared to what we bring to the table at least. But also, that Mothman does not side with her. He is a completely independent entity that's only goal is to maintain peace in China forever. We are a disturbance to that peace, and as such, he is slowly working to kill us. Couple this with challenging content and one of the best bangers of music that this game has ever put out, and you are in for a great time. Shinjuku is just a good story all around. This one serves as our first introduction into the Epic of Remnant section of FGO, and much like Anastasia, shows us how to embrace the weirdness of these chapters. The Epic of Remnant chapters make the bold choice for most of them to remove the second main character, Mosh, from the action, allowing for more close bonding with servants new and old. The story of Shinjuku is that we find ourselves in a world of people who care only about themselves. We are rescued by a mysterious old man and told that there are forces at work behind the scenes, that we either need to adapt to them, or we're gonna die. We meet up with two familiar servants and try and fight our way to freedom. The presentation has a very nice balance of drama and humor, so the oppressive city atmosphere is never smothering to you. There are absolutely scenes that are true body horror, like how Phantom makes his puppets, and honestly, the threat that Lobo could appear at any given moment is really something special. I don't like the ending at all, the whole detective heroes from across time just appearing, and also that we know that Moriarty is the villain the entire time is kind of a bust, but everything else is good, so I don't mind keeping it here. Next we have Atlantis, the most recent addition in NA. I thoroughly enjoyed this chapter, but you can definitely tell that this is a part 1. I enjoyed that the story addresses the military superiority and readiness of the head Cryptor to destroy Chaldea. It certainly is one of the better ways to put us into a bad position in the story. The addition of an actual fight against Wodime is great, and shows us how hopelessly outmatched that we really are. The introduction of the Greek gods is unique, putting them as machines is a very clever twist for them. The moments with Charlotte are great, and Orion has the best character introduction ever, literally pissing on monsters and us, implying that we have seen his teddy bear. Here's the problem with this chapter. The character writing is all over the place. There are characters that are written well, such as Mandracardo coming to terms with who he is as a servant and finding a reason to fight, Charlotte, who just wants to be useful so she will quite literally do anything, and Jason, who is such a showboat about everything and too proud to let us see him die. Honestly, most of the friendlies in this chapter are written fairly well, but the enemies are terrible. I mean, simply awful. Odysseus is boring. He is a human calculator, and that is it. We don't even get to fight him, he is so boring, he just dies. Chiron is written like a standard anime villain. I am stronger than the one that you knew, so I am also better. I can't believe that they actually pulled the exact same bullshit that they did with Solomon here as well, where Wodime lets us go because of his principles and hubris. It's the laziest turn in writing in the defense of the enemies. Canis is done pretty well, even betraying her master because she realized he's bad at what he's doing. The other glaring issue I have with this chapter is that they hype up the 3 major blockades to Olympus over and over and over again. Artemis, Odysseus, Poseidon. Rather than a gradual resolving of these incidents, they focus almost entirely on the Artemis portion and resolve the other 2 in fairly quick succession after. The ending just felt rushed. Hopefully, this is made up for in Olympus. Finally is Camelot. This one is fondly remembered because it was the introduction of the game's first bit of challenging content. I would argue that everything before Camelot is the early game, and after this, it starts to get real. For MMO nerds, this singularity acts like your gear check. I've told the story before, but my team comp that I would force into every situation was 100 Face with no leveled skills, Mash, and Coup Alter. This worked in every situation till I hit Camelot. Then we had Enforcement Knights, Sphinxes, and bosses with insane buffs. So, that's a check in the challenging category that I like. The story itself is very well executed as well, and serves as the perfect coming-of-age type thing for Mash, realizing who she really is and what she is capable of doing. Her gaining of a new noble phantasm and upgrading of her skills was done super well. There are also a lot of very memorable moments in the chapter as well, with Bedivere, Arash, and King Hassan. I will say that only about half of King Arthur's knights are interesting, and Artoria herself is just kind of eh. Like, the downloading people into the Matrix thing is pretty played out and still doesn't make logical sense, and explaining in a way that she has reached divinity so it's fine is not really a great excuse to me, as there are plenty of divinities in Chaldea with rampant emotions. But hey, that's just me being nitpicky. The other thing that I find interesting in this chapter is the dynamic between the cursed arm Hassan and what is implied to be his son, and how he comes to terms with his duty as a servant. It's really well done. Now on to my favorite chapters in FGO. Let's start with Okianus. I have nothing but fond memories of this chapter. The aesthetic is great, I love the maritime setting, Francis Drake is a great heroine for the chapter, the content is challenging for the early game with Hector being a standout in that department, we see actual character bonds formed that go on to this day in Fate with Uriel and Asterios. They make one of the most terrifying Greek monsters human, and even give a damn good reasoning as to why he is the way that he is. Jason is a very hateable villain, being abusive both verbally and physically, but too weak to actually fight on his own, so watching him turn into a tentacle monster is great. If I had to make any real complaints, it is that the last bit is one made of convenience. The whole arc of the Covenant subplot, just being on an island, is a stretch and a half, and the introduction of Artemis and Atalanta just feels half-assed in a lot of ways, but overall, the story itself is just a nice adventure with good company, and I love it. After this is Shimosa. Shimosa does something that I wish was done more in Fate. It creates a reason to use the offered support servant, albeit one that is actually forced into your party, but in the process addresses the fact that we are powerless without our normal servants. I know a fair amount of people dislike Musashi's personality in the story. I disagree, and I love how they have portrayed her, and are willing to address that she is not our world's Musashi, so they just go crazy with it. It makes for a good enough reason for me. The story of Shimosa is also fairly well executed. It gives us a villain and a reason to fight. It doesn't shy away from the realities of what will happen if we fail, such as the entire death of a village by the hands of Hosuin. Plus, for the most part, all the characters put into the villain's role play it super well. Hosuin was directly brainwashed, Tomoe and Chiyome were seeking revenge, Yagyu and Kojiro just wouldn't have a fight to test themselves again, and then Shuten and Raiko are kinda just there, but that's fine. Doman makes for an amazing villain, acting as a puppet master who has thought everything out, and Amakusa showing up is pretty fun. Plus, the horror movie theming over the whole thing just adds to it. Next up is Lostbelt 4. This one is probably my most biased entry, and that is for one reason. The way how they implement urgency into this chapter is brilliant. The cycle that is always happening makes for a great plot device, but also the consequences of not making it in time is quite literally insane. If you are not careful, you will be removed from existence. This chapter stuck with me for this concept alone, and the tackling of what it means to lose somebody but to not even wholly remember them, and then the sense of emptiness that brings. That is a lot of mental baggage to just carry around. They played that card very well. I also enjoyed the characters, both the friendly and not. William Tell is a standout, interesting character in this chapter. After realizing that he has been duped, literally takes on God, knowing that he will lose, just to give him the middle finger and shatter his reality that he is perfect. Also, bringing back the fight with Karna and his evolution into Super Kana Ramamama is a perfect climactic fight. Finally, the way in which they write Jinako, I believe, is done very well. A lot of people hate Jinako in FGO because of her personality. She's just fat Osakabe Hime. I love them both, but they have the exact same personality. Her existential nightmare, going back to the beginning of time pretty much and having to remain conscious, plays with the horror that it is hard to comprehend. So her reuniting with Karna after that is a pretty powerful moment. The worst part of this chapter is Arjuna Alter himself, who's just a vacant villain who does nothing but appear and be imposing. He's scary for what he can do, but that's it. There's a lot of potential for this character, but it goes absolutely nowhere in this chapter. That said, the ending where he does finally remember who Karna is and they go out and they do the fight is very, very good. Alright, my favorite singularity, and probably a lot of other people's, making me a huge normie, is Babylon. This is the best story that they have written and that is available in NA currently. It has everything that is good about Fate storytelling and amps it up to 11. The characters are all well written. The villain's motives make sense for all 5 of the main antagonists, save for Ketz, who's kind of just there. Kingu just wants to serve a purpose and has been directed by Gorgon to follow her. Gorgon wishes to end humanity for all the wrongs that they have done to her. Eris Kegel wants to keep the underworld safe and flourishing, so she's willing to go to any lengths to make sure that happens. Tiamat is a primordial being that is only acting on her nature as a mother goddess, so she is unable to help but do what she does. Gilgamesh is well written as an ally / king of Uruk. The arc with Ushi and Benkei has a really good payoff. The death of Leonidas is impactful, as is Anna's. The growth between Gil and Enkidu is great to watch. The stakes are high given that we actually get to slowly watch all of our resources and everything that we are fighting for vanish before our eyes until nobody is left in Uruk is super good. Also, the most hype moment in history where King Hassan just shows up and is like, alright, let me show you how the boss does it, and literally teaches a deity how to die. The main complaint that I have for this chapter is that it starts off super slow and meanders a bit with us just doing chores, but really that's it. The challenge is there, the story is what you want out of an FGO story, it is just the best one that they have written so far in NA. But that is it! Let me know what you thought in the comments. Send me your lists on Twitter as well. I am finally caving and making an account on JP to be better informed on this stuff, rather than waiting 2 years to get caught up in NA. I'm hoping that by doing this I can probably do some better analysis stuff for the videos, and not just be like, well, that's not happened yet on NA, so I really can't go into it because I don't want to spoil myself. I'm gonna just go get it all done. So if you have any recommendations on how to better play that, let me know. Like this video as it really does help out the channel, subscribe to catch these as they go up, follow my Twitch for significantly less structured content. I also have a Twitter, but for now, keep your chin up, peace.